He didn't notice the danger until the moment it swallowed his leg whole. Mark Dalton, 67 years old and hiking alone before sunrise, stepped onto what looked like a stable slab of sandstone. But the moment his weight shifted, the rock rolled, his footing vanished, and his right leg plunged straight into a narrow crack between two massive stones. Before he could jerk himself free, a second boulder, one he hadn't even seen leaning above him, tilted forward and slammed into place like a door closing. Pain flooded up his leg so violently that for a second the world flashed white. He tried to pull back. Nothing. He tried again, harder. Only a deeper bolt of agony answered him. His knee throbbed, his shin burned, and he could already feel warmth spreading inside his boot. He didn't need to look to know the skin had broken. The canyon around him stayed completely still, as if observing quietly while he fought to breathe. Mark tried lifting himself with both hands, but the rock held him with a calm, merciless weight. He pushed again, sweat running down his temples, the strain turning his arms to trembling wires. Still trapped. A thin strip of sky shone far above, framed by canyon walls rising like cold, silent witnesses. No signal, no other hikers. No one knew he had taken this side path. The desert felt endless, empty. Listening, Mark swallowed against the dryness in his throat. He'd survived engine blowouts on the interstate, a rollover in Montana, heartache he thought would crush him. But this narrow crack of earth, felt different, personal. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "Not like this," he whispered. "Stories like this make me wonder how far people travel just to listen for a moment. Tell me from which city you're watching, and what time it is there now. I like knowing how far these stories reach." Mark Dalton had never imagined that retirement would feel like standing in an empty room after everyone else had gone home. For 41 years, he'd driven long-haul routes across the country, living by schedules, fuel stops, and the quiet company of the road. The highways had shaped him, mile after mile, day after day, until motion felt like purpose. But when he finally handed in his keys at 65, the stillness hit him harder than any storm he'd outrun. He tried filling the silence with small routines, morning coffee, afternoon radio, the occasional church picnic his son urged him to attend. But nothing stuck, and the house he'd once shared with his wife felt too large, too hollow, too full of echoes that didn't answer back. Patrick, his only child, kept telling him to get outside more, to join a walking group, to do something that involved sun instead of dim rooms and old movies. Mark resisted at first. His knees weren't the same. His balance wasn't perfect, and he hated the idea of being the slowest person in any group. But grief has a way of pushing people gently toward anything that feels like movement, and eventually he bought a pair of hiking boots and started with short, forgiving trails. At first the walks were just that, walks, nothing special. But slowly, the quiet began to help. The desert didn't judge him for taking breaks. The wind didn't care if his breath came short. And for the first time in years, he felt something loosening inside him. So when he woke early that morning, before the sun, before the heat, and saw how clear the sky was, he thought a short canyon loop might be exactly what he needed. Nothing dangerous, nothing difficult. Just another small step toward feeling alive again. The canyon felt almost asleep when Mark Dalton entered it that morning. Cool air lingered between the tall walls, carrying the faint smell of stone and dry brush. The sun had barely risen high enough to touch the upper ridges, leaving the floor in a soft blue shade. Mark walked carefully, steadying his breath, letting his boots crunch gently over gravel. Mornings like this had become his quiet ritual, a way to fill the hours retirement left open. He wasn't looking for adventure. He wasn't chasing a challenge. He told himself this walk would be nothing more than a slow warm-up before breakfast. His knees didn't love steep climbs anymore, and his balance wasn't perfect, but he'd learned that movement helped him more than sitting at home thinking about the past. As he moved deeper into the canyon, he felt a strange comfort. The world narrowed around him, and for a man who had spent most of his life driving endless highways, the narrowness felt safe. Here there were no horns, no schedules, no memories waiting in every corner of the house, just rock, wind, and his own steady footsteps. About a mile in, The trail split. The left fork was clearly marked and well-traveled. The right fork was narrower, half hidden between two leaning ridges, a slice of shadow leading toward what looked like a shorter path. Mark squinted at it. It seemed harmless enough. Smooth floor, gentle slope. A shortcut, maybe. Old habits die slowly. Truckers love shortcuts. Just a quick detour, he murmured, adjusting his pack. He stepped into the side passage. At first, the path widened comfortably, allowing him to walk without turning sideways. The walls curved upward, in beautiful sculpted lines left by centuries of water. He brushed his hand over the surface. It felt cool and slightly damp, almost polished. Light shifted above him, painting the stone in soft orange streaks. He kept walking. Everything felt stable. Pebbles rolled under his boots, but nothing unusual. He even hummed under his breath, a small tune without shape. For a few peaceful minutes, he forgot about age, loneliness, and the quiet house waiting for him. Then he reached the slab. A wide, pale rock lay across the path like a natural step. He tested it with the edge of his boot. Solid. Or so it seemed. He placed his weight on it, planning to step over and continue. The slab pivoted. His foot slid forward as the surface rotated beneath him. His other leg tried to compensate, but the movement was too sudden. His balance vanished. He reached for the canyon wall, but his palm scraped uselessly along the smooth stone. His right leg dropped straight into a narrow gap between two hidden rocks. Before he even understood what was happening, a second boulder, balanced above the gap, shifted. It rolled forward with a grinding groan and slammed down across his shin, pinning him in place. The pain that followed wasn't sharp, it was explosive. It felt like his entire leg caught fire. Mark's breath left him in a violent rush, and the canyon blurred. For a moment he couldn't hear, couldn't think, couldn't move. When the world returned, he was on both hands, trembling, sweat already forming along his brow. He forced himself to look. His leg sat twisted between the rocks, boot wedged deep in the crack. Warmth pooled inside the fabric. "Oh God," he whispered. He tried pulling his leg back. Agony shot up his calf, so intense he nearly blacked out again. He stopped instantly, gripping the ground until his knuckles whitened. His heart pounded hard against his ribs. He pushed against the upper boulder with both hands. It didn't budge. He pushed again, harder, arms shaking. Still nothing. The rock felt fused to the earth. "Come on," he muttered, breath ragged. He changed angles, trying to lift his thigh, trying to twist free, but every attempt only deepened the pain. The pressure felt absolute, ancient. The canyon didn't care about his panic. It didn't care about him at all. His backpack had slipped off during the fall. It lay just out of reach, close enough to see the water bottle inside, far enough to feel like a taunt. He stretched his fingers desperately, but the awkward angle of his trapped body made it impossible. He swallowed, throat dry. His pulse throbbed in his ears. Heat would rise soon, and shade didn't last long in places like this. He needed the water. He needed tools. He needed anything. He looked around for options. A small desert shrub clung to the canyon wall a few feet away, its branches thin but flexible. He snapped off a straight one carefully, wincing as the motion tugged his injured leg. He held the branch like a hook, guiding it toward the strap of the backpack. It trembled in his grip, slipping once, then twice. He steadied his breath and tried again. This time the tip caught. He pulled slowly. The pack slid an inch, then another. He adjusted the angle and dragged it closer, until his hand finally closed around the strap. Relief washed over him like water. He opened the pack immediately. 1 half-liter bottle, 2 protein bars, a small first aid kit, a folded bandana, a multi-purpose tool with a dull knife. Not much, but enough to give him a chance. He wrapped the bandana tightly above the wound to slow the bleeding. Pain flared, but at least blood stopped spreading as quickly. He closed his eyes and breathed through the worst of it. When the wave subsided, he forced himself to think clearly. He examined the trap. The lower rock was anchored deeply. The upper one had rotated when he stepped on the slab. If he could rotate it back, even slightly, the pressure might loosen enough for his leg to slip out. He searched the ground for something he could use as a lever, only small rocks, useless twigs, and sun-bleached debris. The canyon floor was too clean. swept by seasonal floods. He rubbed his face, frustrated. Then he saw it. A thicker branch lodged high in a crevice above him, likely carried there by water years before. Out of reach for now, but solid enough to shift a boulder. He studied the canyon wall. Climbing wasn't possible with one leg trapped, but if he could use his weight and balance, maybe he could stand just high enough to hook the branch with the multi-purpose tool. It was risky. It was stupid. But staying still was worse. He planted his free foot carefully, gripping the wall with his hands. His arms strained, back muscles trembling as he pulled himself upright. His injured leg screamed, a deep, twisting pain that forced a groan from his throat. He almost gave up, but he stretched the tool upward, millimeters short. He stood taller, breath shaking. The tool hooked the branch, slowly, carefully. He pulled. The branch loosened, slid, then dropped onto his shoulder. He almost laughed. For the first time since the fall, he felt something like hope. Mark held the branch in both hands, surprised by its weight. It was thicker than it looked, weathered but sturdy, long enough to give him leverage. He set it aside for a moment and wiped sweat from his brow. The canyon was warming quickly. Shade was shrinking. The stillness of the early morning had evaporated, replaced by the first hints of the desert heat that would soon start pressing down on him like a lid. He drank a small sip of water, just enough to wet his mouth, and capped the bottle immediately. He couldn't afford more. Not with the sun rising and his leg trapped in a place where help wouldn't pass for hours, maybe days. His shin pulsed in a sickening rhythm. Beneath the bandana, he felt the deep, throbbing swell of tissue starting to react to the trauma. He knew what swelling meant: less circulation, more pressure, and a shrinking chance of slipping the leg free. He forced himself not to imagine what the inside of his boot looked like. The warmth he'd felt earlier hadn't lessened. He focused on the boulder above him. It was slightly rounded, its lower edge pressing across his leg like the world's cruelest clamp. It had rotated before. If he could force it to rotate again just a little, he might get a gap, a slim one, enough for hope. He grabbed the multi-purpose tool and wedged the small pry bar between two stones beside the boulder. Then he set the thicker branch over it, using the tool as a fulcrum. It wasn't perfect, the angles were tight, but it was something. He pressed down with his left arm, muscles straining, the branch flexing dangerously. The wood creaked. His forearm tightened. His shoulder burned. Sweat rolled down his back. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, stone grated against stone. The boulder shifted perhaps a centimeter, maybe less. But Mark felt it. He froze, afraid that any sudden movement would undo the progress. He eased the pressure, then repositioned his hands and pressed again. This time, the branch didn't move the rock at all. The angle had changed. He'd hit the limit of what this setup could do. But that brief shift meant something important. The stone was not fully locked. It could move. And that possibility changed everything. Mark leaned back against the canyon wall, catching his breath. The canyon hummed around him, a low vibration created by distant heat rising. It reminded him of the long hours he'd spent idling his truck at rest stops, feeling the engine's faint tremor through the floor. He took another sip of water, smaller this time. The sun crept higher. Shadows retreated. Sweat dried on his skin, leaving salt. His head felt hot, an early sign of heat fatigue. He loosened his shirt collar and scanned the canyon again, desperate for additional tools or leverage. He saw stones, sand, dust. Nothing long enough or strong enough to replace the branch. "Come on, think," he muttered. He examined the rock directly. The top boulder's rounded surface created a pivot point. If he could wedge something beneath the roundest part and force a tilt, he might create a small gap lower on the leg. He shifted his body, reaching awkwardly into the narrow space behind the rock. His fingers touched a small natural shelf. He used the multi-purpose tool to chip away at loose fragments, trying to create a better anchor for the lever. Each movement sent pulses of pain through his shin, but he pushed through it. After several minutes, his hands trembled from strain. He paused, breathing hard. He needed rest. His heart raced too fast. Heat made everything harder. He leaned his head back against the canyon wall, letting his eyes close for a moment. That was when he heard it, a faint, skittering echo, distant but real. His eyes opened. He held his breath. There it was again, tiny claws scraping stone. "Great," he whispered. "Just what I need." Rodents lived in canyons, chipmunks, ground squirrels, pack rats. Most were harmless, but some were curious, some were bold, and some liked the smell of blood. He wasn't bleeding heavily, but enough to leave droplets near the crack. The idea of something approaching in the night made his stomach twist. He grabbed a handful of loose pebbles and placed them beside him. Weapons, if needed. They wouldn't do much, but the sound of a stone hitting rock might scare small animals away. A wave of dizziness washed through him. He blinked until the canyon stopped tilting. He couldn't afford dehydration. The heat reflected off the stone walls like an oven. He drank another sip of water, only one, and wiped his lips. He checked his injured leg. The bandana was soaked with sweat and a faint reddish tint. He loosened it slightly to relieve pressure, then retightened it carefully. Too tight and he'd cut circulation. Too loose and bleeding would resume. He needed shade again. He dragged himself backward by inches, using his elbows to shift his upper body into the narrow strip of darkness cast by the canyon wall. The movement twisted his leg slightly. The boulder responded with a crushing pulse of pain. Mark gritted his teeth and forced himself to continue. Sweat broke across his forehead as he finally settled into the shade. He took slow breaths, counting each one. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time in crises bends strangely. He knew that from past accidents on the road. He looked up. The branch he'd retrieved still looked strong enough. The multi-purpose tool had survived the first attempt. He needed a new plan. He turned the tool in his hands, noticing the small saw on one side. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't long. But maybe he could notch the thick branch to create a better pivot. He set to work, sawing slowly. The wood resisted at first, then splintered slightly. The sun climbed. His progress was steady but painfully slow. His arm shook from effort. His throat ached with dryness. At last, the notch was deep enough. He placed the modified branch under the boulder again, slipping the notch around a protruding stone to stabilize the lever. The setup felt more secure than before. He braced himself, planting his free foot firmly. He pushed. The branch bowed, threatening to snap. He pressed harder. Sweat dripped into his eyes. His hand slipped once, almost losing the lever entirely. Then another grind of stone. The boulder shifted again, more than the first time. He felt the pressure on his shin change. He pulled his leg. Pain tore up through the bone, but the leg moved barely. A millimeter, maybe two. He gasped, half from pain, half from hope. He tried again. The rock resisted. He pushed with the lever again, screaming through gritted teeth as his muscles burned. The stone shifted one more time, and his leg slid back another fraction. Not enough, but proof. He wasn't stuck in the exact same way anymore. He leaned against the canyon wall, overwhelmed by exhaustion, shaking from effort and agony. His whole body felt hollow. His leg throbbed relentlessly, each pulse sending a sick jolt through him. But he wasn't losing. Not yet. By early afternoon, the canyon felt like a narrow furnace. Heat radiated from the stone walls, shimmering in faint waves. Mark wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, exhausted, dizzy, and painfully aware that he had already used more energy than he could afford. His leg pulsed in a slow, sick rhythm. Each beat a reminder of how little time he had before swelling turned the situation from desperate to impossible. He needed rest, real rest. But every time he tried to settle his body, the throbbing in his shin forced him to shift again. There was no position that didn't hurt, no angle that didn't make the trapped bone scream. Even breathing too deeply sent tremors through the wound. He took another small sip of water. The bottle felt frighteningly light now. He stared at it, as if willing it to refill. Half the day remained, and his reserves were shrinking far too fast. He capped the bottle again and set it beside him, determined not to touch it for a long while. One thing he knew from years on the road: dehydration makes fools out of men. It clouds judgment, twists thoughts, erases logic. He needed clarity, not panic. He leaned back against the canyon wall and forced himself to breathe slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth. When his mind drifted into panic, he anchored it with memories, mostly of Linda. Her laugh, her calm. The way she used to place her hand on his arm whenever the world felt too loud. Thinking of her steadied him more than anything else. "You'd tell me to stop rushing," he whispered to the canyon. "Take it minute by minute." A faint breeze moved through the narrow passage. It didn't cool much, but it brushed his face with something gentler than heat. He closed his eyes and let it pass. Somewhere above him, a shadow flickered, a bird gliding across the rim. He watched it circle once before disappearing. Life went on in the world above, a world he couldn't reach. He wondered how many hikers were on the main trail right now, maybe a mile away, maybe less. If he shouted with everything he had, would the sound even escape these walls? Probably not. He considered yelling anyway, but yelling cost energy, and voice, and hope. He saved it for later. Instead, he examined the rocks again. His earlier effort had shifted the upper boulder slightly, enough to loosen the pressure on his shin by a fraction, but the gap was microscopic, nowhere near large enough to pull the leg free. He needed another rotation, maybe two, maybe more. The thought made his stomach tighten. He picked up the branch again, testing its strength. It had held up surprisingly well through the earlier attempts, but cracks were forming along one edge. He needed it to survive at least one more forceful push, maybe two. Without it, he had almost nothing left. He checked the multi-purpose tool. The pry bar was bent slightly, but still usable. The saw, dull as it was, had carved the notch he needed. The metal felt warm in his hands, heated by the sun. He tested the angle of the branch, sliding it under the boulder, fitting the notch against the protruding stone he had chipped earlier. It felt solid, more solid than before. If he could get just one more shift, even a small one, he might be able to pull his leg farther back and change the angle of the trap. He braced himself, planted his free foot, gripped the branch with both hands. "Come on," he muttered. "Work with me." He pressed down on the lever, jaw clenched, muscles trembling. The branch flexed. Wood creaked. His arms shook with strain. The canyon felt silent, as if holding its breath with him. Then, movement. A tiny grind. Stone scraping stone. He pushed harder, summoning every bit of strength left in his shoulders. The boulder shifted again. Pain tore through his shin, but the leg moved another millimeter, maybe two. Enough to feel the difference. Enough to know he was not entirely helpless. He collapsed back against the canyon wall, panting, drenched in sweat. His pulse hammered so loudly, he could hear it echoing faintly between the stone walls. He closed his eyes, breathing raggedly, fighting the surge of nausea that always followed intense pain. When the worst subsided, he reached for his leg, testing the sensation carefully. He touched just above the bandana, lightly. The skin felt tight, swollen, frighteningly warm. Not a good sign. Swelling meant time was running out. The bandana's pressure reduced the bleeding, but it couldn't stop the internal swelling that was slowly building beneath the skin. If he didn't get free soon, necrosis might follow. He didn't let himself dwell on that thought. He needed a plan. He took one of the protein bars from his pack and forced himself to eat half. The food tasted dry, almost dusty, but the calories were necessary. The remaining half he stored away. He imagined Patrick scolding him for hiking alone, for not telling anyone where he'd gone. His throat tightened. He wished he'd called his son that morning. Even just a quick, "Hey, heading out for a walk." Something Patrick could use later to guess his location if things went wrong. "Idiot," he whispered to himself. A distant sound echoed through the canyon, a low rumble far away but unmistakable. Thunder. He froze, listening. Another rumble. Closer. Mark's stomach dropped. Flash floods. Even distant storms could send walls of water roaring into slot canyons like this. He'd seen warning signs at parks before, watched videos online. It didn't take much. An hour of rain 20 miles away could turn a dry canyon into a river. He looked upward. The sky above him was still mostly clear, but the horizon beyond the canyon walls might be telling a different story. He needed higher ground immediately, but he couldn't move, not with the boulder gripping his leg. Panic rose fast, sharp, like a spark catching dry brush. He slammed it down with everything he had. Panic meant bad decisions. Bad decisions meant dying here. He took slow breaths again. 1, 2, 3. He studied the canyon floor. A few rocks lay near his hip. If he stacked them, maybe he could create a better fulcrum for the lever. Something taller. Something that gave him more upward force. He grabbed a rock, small but dense, and slid it under the lever point. Then another. He built a small stack, shaky but workable. He repositioned the branch, aligning it with the new fulcrum. The angle improved, slightly, enough to matter. He braced himself once more, gripping the wood tight, every muscle ready to protest. He pushed down. The branch groaned under the pressure. The fulcrum stones wobbled. Sweat poured down his face. But the rock moved. A third shift, larger this time. Mark gasped, the sound raw, half sob, half relief. He pulled his leg backward with both hands. Pain exploded again, but the leg slid back farther this time. Not free. Nowhere near free, but no longer buried as deeply as before. He collapsed again, chest heaving, vision blurring. Outside the canyon, the thunder sounded again. Closer. Time was running out faster than he thought. Thunder rolled again, closer this time, vibrating through the canyon floor beneath Mark's palms. He opened his eyes fully, forcing himself to focus past the haze of pain and fatigue. Storms didn't need to be overhead to kill him. A downpour miles away could send a wall of water through this place like a freight train. Slot canyons were funnels. They didn't care who was inside. He wiped dust from his lips, tasting dryness and metallic fear. Panic fluttered in his chest, but he steadied it with slow breaths. He'd survived panic before, jackknifed trailers, ice-slick highways, engine blowouts in the dead of night. Panic never helped then. It wouldn't help now. He looked at his leg, swollen, stiff, throbbing in a relentless rhythm. The bandana above the wound was damp with sweat and a dark stain. He loosened it very slightly, then tightened it again just enough to maintain pressure. Too tight risked cutting off circulation completely. Too loose risked bleeding he couldn't afford. His calf twitched involuntarily. He grimaced. That twitch was new, not good. He pulled the water bottle from his pack, feeling its lightness like a punch. Only a few good sips remained. He let one roll across his tongue before swallowing. It wasn't enough, but it bought him a few minutes of clarity. The thunder rumbled again, louder. He scanned the canyon walls for anything, any ledge, handhold, crevice, somewhere he could climb once freed. But the stone was mostly smooth, polished by centuries of floods. Even with 2 good legs, climbing out here would be hard. With one leg wrecked, it would be nearly impossible. Still, he'd find something. He had to. The branch lay beside him, cracked, splintered, but still intact. The multi-purpose tool rested near his knee, warped but usable. The small rock stack he'd made earlier wobbled slightly, but held its shape. He'd need all of it, every piece, every ounce of strength left. He repositioned himself, swallowing a groan as his shin screamed. He checked the angle of the boulder again. The last shift had created a slight gap, barely enough to see, but enough to feel when he pulled. He needed one final rotation, one real movement, something big enough to create a pathway for his leg to slide free. He wedged the branch deeper under the boulder, adjusting the fulcrum rocks to give the lever more height. His hands shook as he worked, not just from pain, but from the pressure of time. The air had shifted. He could smell moisture on the wind now. The storm was coming. He braced the branch with both hands and inhaled. His arms trembled even before he applied force. His shoulders felt rubbery. His back burned. He wasn't sure how much strength he had left, but he had no choice except to try. He pushed down hard. The branch bowed immediately. He pressed harder. Wood creaked. The fulcrum rocks shifted. Pain lanced up his arms. His breath grew ragged. "Come on," he hissed through clenched teeth. "Move!" He threw every bit of remaining power into the push. Stone grated violently. The boulder rotated, more than before. Enough that Mark felt the pressure on his shin change so suddenly he nearly screamed. His leg shifted 2, maybe 3 centimeters, not enough to escape, but more movement than he'd gotten all day. He gasped for air, lightheaded from the effort. His vision wavered. The canyon tilted. He forced himself to stay upright. He pulled his leg backward, bracing with both hands against the canyon floor. Pain roared through him, bright and overwhelming, but the leg moved. Half an inch, another half. His boot caught on the lower rock, stopped, then slid again. He felt something tear inside, deep, sharp, frightening. He groaned, biting down hard on his sleeve, but the movement was bigger than anything he'd achieved earlier. He collapsed backward, panting, sweat dripping from his face. His heart pounded like a drum. His arms trembled uncontrollably. Thunder cracked sharply overhead. He froze. That wasn't distant anymore. He looked upward, watching the thin strip of sky darken with spreading grey. If rain hit the canyon's source, water would surge through here in minutes. He imagined it barreling down the narrow path, brown, foamy, filled with debris, too powerful for anyone to outrun. Even standing fully mobile, survival odds were low. But pinned? 0. He forced himself upright again. No time, no choice. One more shift, one more rotation. It had to happen now. He inspected the branch. Cracks webbed along the grain. One more strong push might break it. He couldn't let it snap prematurely. If it shattered before the boulder moved, everything ended. He repositioned the fulcrum stones, leaning them slightly to one side to change the angle. He wedged the branch under the boulder again. He whispered, "Please." He pushed. The wood groaned loudly. He pushed harder. Something popped, not in the branch, but in his leg. A deep, sickening shift. He cried out, the sound raw and cracked. The pain lit up every nerve, stealing his breath. His vision went white around the edges. But the rock moved. A big shift this time, a full rotation. Suddenly, the pressure on his shin released by a degree so sharp he nearly slumped forward. He yanked his leg back with everything he had left, using the canyon wall for leverage. Pain tore upward in a violent wave, but his boot slid free, dragging skin, scraping bone, twisting wrong, but free at last. He collapsed backward, hitting the rock with a choked sob. Relief flooded him, followed immediately by dizziness so intense he thought he might pass out. His leg throbbed uncontrollably, swelling rapidly. His boot felt tight, too tight. He reached down and loosened the laces, gritting his teeth as his calf ballooned. He pulled the boot off with shaking hands. The sight wasn't good. Swelling, dark bruising, spreading fast, blood seeping from torn skin. But it wasn't catastrophic. He needed to move now. He dragged himself backward with his elbows, inch by inch putting distance between himself and the trap. Every movement jarred his leg, sending waves of hot pain shooting upward. Sweat poured from him, soaking his shirt. The thunder cracked again, closer. A faint cold breeze swept through the canyon, a warning. He reached for his pack, slung it onto his shoulder, and began crawling toward a slightly higher ledge he'd noticed earlier. It wasn't safe from flooding, not entirely, but it was higher than the canyon floor, maybe high enough to survive the first surge. His arms trembled with each pull. His injured leg dragged uselessly behind him, the skin scraping against stone, leaving faint smears of color along his path. He growled through the pain, refusing to stop. He'd crawled out of worse things. He'd survived worse nights. When he reached the ledge, he used his arms to haul himself upward. His palms burned. His shoulders ached. But he got onto it, barely. Thunder roared again. Mark leaned against the canyon wall, chest heaving, staring at the darkening sky far above. He was free. But now he had to fight a different enemy. The storm. The first raindrop hit the canyon floor like a dark seed bursting against the dust. Mark watched it spread, a tiny circle growing wider before sinking into the thirsty ground. Another drop followed, then another. The air shifted. The faint breeze became a cool breath that swept down the stone corridor, carrying the sharp smell of rain. Somewhere far away, water was already collecting, already running downhill, already searching for the narrow paths carved by centuries. He didn't have minutes. He had seconds. Mark braced his palms against the ledge and pulled himself upright. His leg buckled immediately, a hot spike of agony shooting from his shin into his hip. He nearly collapsed, catching himself against the wall at the last moment. He gritted his teeth, forcing his weight onto his good leg. "You can stand," he whispered. "You have to." He tested it again. Pain flared, but the leg held, barely. He leaned heavily on the canyon wall, using it as a crutch while he scanned the tight passage. The ground sloped upward about 20 yards ahead, leading toward a slightly wider section of rock. If he could reach that before the water arrived, he had a chance. A small one, but better than staying here. Thunder cracked overhead, echoing like the canyon was splitting apart. He dragged his injured leg behind him, each step sending a wave of heat and nausea through his chest. His breath grew shallow. The bandana around his shin was soaked with sweat, and dark blotches had spread beneath it. His calf felt tight, dangerously swollen, reacting to the trauma with uncontrollable pressure. He used his hands as much as his legs, pulling himself along the wall, half hopping, half falling forward. The canyon narrowed again, forming a natural funnel anyone with sense would avoid during storms. But he didn't have the luxury of choosing safer paths. He just needed to keep moving. Another raindrop hit his face, then another. A cold sprinkle turned into a steady, chilling drizzle. The sky above him darkened completely. The light in the canyon dimmed, swallowed by storm clouds he couldn't see directly. He picked up his pace, ignoring the pain, ignoring the dizziness, ignoring the instinct screaming at him to lie down and rest. Rest meant death. Movement meant hope. The first true sign of danger arrived as a distant roar, the unmistakable sound of water moving fast. It echoed strangely, bouncing off the canyon walls like a living thing. Mark froze. Not in fear, but in recognition. He'd heard that sound before, in Wyoming years ago, when a storm upstream had unleashed a torrent that swept across the highway, nearly taking his truck with it. He'd seen the raw power of sudden water. He'd seen guardrails twist like wire and asphalt peel away like skin. That sound meant run. He pushed forward aggressively, grabbing the canyon wall to haul himself around a bend. His injured leg quivered violently, threatening to give out. He slammed his shoulder into the rock to stay upright. Ahead, the canyon widened into a chamber-like space. Large boulders sat scattered along the floor. Some ledges looked climbable, maybe 4 or 5 feet high, not safe from a full surge, but higher than the canyon bottom. He aimed for the nearest one. His breath hitched as he dragged his leg, turning his body sideways to angle up the slope. His boot slipped once on whetstone, sending him to his knees. The impact jarred his injured leg so badly he nearly blacked out. He bit down on a cry, blinking through the blur. He crawled the last few feet and gripped the edge of the ledge. His arms trembled violently as he lifted himself. His bad leg dangled uselessly, scraping against the rock until he managed to roll onto the platform. For a moment he lay there, panting, face pressed against cold stone. The roar behind him grew louder. He forced himself to turn. A thin stream of water entered the canyon, sliding along the ground like a scouting snake. It twisted around rocks, gathering speed, fed by countless droplets falling from above. The trickle became a ribbon, then a thin sheet, then a foamy streak that moved too fast to be ignored. "Not good," he muttered. He scanned the walls. Another ledge sat higher on the opposite side, maybe 6 feet up. It looked reachable, barely. If he tried to stay on his current platform, water might wash over it. But that higher ledge, that could save him. He crawled to the edge of his platform and braced his hands against the canyon wall. His injured leg screamed with every small movement, but he ignored it. He pulled himself upright, hopping on his good leg toward the opposite wall. Water splashed against the stones behind him. Fast. He reached the base of the higher ledge. His heart pounded. The wall was rougher here, offering tiny holds. Enough for a climb, but only if he used both legs. And he couldn't. He sucked in a breath and reached upward, fingers closing around a jagged edge. His arms shook from fatigue. He pulled, trying to lift his body, but his injured leg dragged him down, dead weight. "Come on," he growled. He tried again, this time using his knee to wedge himself higher. Pain burst through his shin like a lightning strike, but the movement lifted him just enough to catch a second hold. He pushed, pulled, fought. Water roared louder behind him. His hand slipped once. He almost fell, but he caught himself by pure instinct. scraping his arm painfully along a sharp ridge. Blood trickled from a thin cut, annoying but irrelevant. He sucked in air, as if it were fuel, and pulled one last time with everything he had. His torso cleared the ledge. He rolled onto it, chest heaving, vision spinning. Below, water surged into the canyon, swirling around his first platform. Debris rushed past, branches, rocks, muddy foam. The ledge he had just left disappeared under a foot of water. Then, too, he lay trembling, soaking wet, but alive. Minutes passed. The storm peaked, then softened. The water rose, then slowed. Eventually it settled into a steady flow, rushing through the canyon like a river in miniature. Mark remained on the ledge, muscles shaking from exhaustion, pain pulsing through his leg in harsh waves. He took a tiny sip of water, barely more than a drop. He didn't have much left, but the worst danger, the flood, had passed. For now. He looked upward. The walls above this higher ledge angled slightly, forming a natural ramp, steep but climbable with enough determination. Beyond that, he saw a faint hint of a wider passage, maybe a route out, maybe salvation. He exhaled slowly. "You're not done," he whispered. "Not yet." He wiped the rain from his face and gripped the wall, and began the long, agonizing climb toward daylight. Mark didn't remember every second of the climb. He only remembered the rhythm of survival. Reach, pull, breathe, endure. The canyon walls blurred into shades of rust and gray as he dragged himself upward, one trembling movement at a time. His injured leg barely responded, sending jolts of pain through his body whenever it brushed against stone. But inch by inch, he rose toward the widening passage above him. By the time he reached the upper slope, the storm had weakened. Sunlight broke through scattered clouds, glinting across pools of rainwater left behind by the flood. Mark crawled over the ridge, collapsing on a bed of gravel. For several long minutes he lay there staring at the sky, lungs pulling in the hot desert air like it was the sweetest thing he had ever tasted. He wasn't safe yet, but he was out. He used his backpack as a crutch and limped across the open plateau, following instinct more than direction. His vision wavered, his breath came shallow, but he kept moving until a distant pair of voices drifted through the stillness. Two hikers appeared around a bend, startled, then rushing toward him. Mark let out a shaky laugh as his legs finally gave way. He had survived, and this time, he wasn't alone. Life gives us warnings we often ignore. Tell me, what second chance did life offer you? And what did you do with it?